Please welcome to the stage, Scott Sandell.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's great to be here. I am so glad you did not try to read the bio that was submitted by NEA on my behalf. Everyone would be asleep within minutes. And Andrea, thank you for having me. I mean, you did an amazing job with this whole program. Obviously, you made one critical mistake, which is that you put me last instead of our last speaker, who was so phenomenal. So I'm sorry. I'll try to be brief. What was the 5 Bs? We'll try to stick with that, since I don't want you all to fall asleep shortly after lunch. But just quickly, I am deeply, deeply honored to receive this award. Tyson was a good friend. He was an extraordinary human being and a real champion of diversity. We got to work together on some things shortly before his death, and I'm going to miss him every day. In terms of what we're all here to talk about, I've made some contributions, but I think the truth is, and we all know this was reflected by the last speaker, we're not doing any of this alone, right? There's so many people that, if I've done anything, I've enabled people to do things, and actually I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But finding ways to promote greater inclusion of women and men of diverse backgrounds is actually something that has been a part of my reason for being in Silicon Valley. I came from Boston, which I thought was kind of a parochial town, and I came here because I thought Silicon Valley was a meritocracy, and to a large degree it is, but it's one of the most diverse metropolitan areas in the world, and I saw the power of diversity in the companies that I invested in. NEA, which is a large venture capital firm, had almost no diversity to speak of when I started. We'll talk about what it looks like today. It had 0 27 years ago when I started. But I could see in the portfolio companies that we invested in that diversity really mattered. And so I actually, when I would be interviewed about what the secret of Silicon Valley is, I always said the secret of Silicon Valley is diversity. It's the most diverse metropolitan area in the world. However, it's still missing out. That's why we're here. There's a long way to go. But I think the good news is that Silicon Valley as a whole and the ethos of Silicon Valley understands that. And I think that's what is going to enable Silicon Valley to move forward and embrace all forms of diversity. I think most of you are probably aware. Some of you are from out of town. Tim, sitting next to me, has never been to Silicon Valley before. So maybe this isn't true for everybody. But I think most of you know that venture capital, which is this tiny little speck in the world, it's about 0.3% of US GDP invested every year, but it has an amazing impact. Just our firm alone, which is also a pretty tiny little organization, has helped build more than 650 successful businesses that have generated a cumulative market value of $600 billion and created over 600,000 jobs. I mean, think about that. Again, that is not me, okay? I've been a part of it for 27 years. That's a lot of other people. But it's pretty cool when you can take a small amount of money and have that kind of an impact. But it also means that we have a responsibility. Because looking back on the 44 years of NEA, as I said, it started out, frankly, all white guys. There were 2 women when I joined the whole organization. But our responsibility is to change that going forward, and that's what we're working on. And I think ultimately, with a little bit of patience, we're going to get there. Because as I said, Silicon Valley understands how to embrace all kinds of people. It just hasn't embraced all of them yet. I've long believed that being a leading venture capital firm, which I think we rightfully are, is not about winning deals. It's not about the performance of your funds. It's about the impact you have and the difference that you make. As an investor, you can actually have a pretty incredible impact because we're not just investing in public stocks. We're investing in startup companies. We sit on the board. We're actively involved in them. And I've been fortunate to get involved in companies like Coursera, which started in my backyard. It today provides, access to higher education from the top universities in the world that has over 70 million learners around the world today. Companies like Bloom Energy and GoodLeap that are helping to solve climate change. The success of these enterprises and many others made it clear to me long ago that companies can do well and do good. And so, as I've said, cultivating a diverse and inclusive venture capital industry has long been my priority. Frankly, I think that the future of innovation in this country depends on how successful we are at achieving more diverse groups of entrepreneurs and investors. Breaking down barriers and working together is how we're going to build a stronger innovation economy in this century, and that is critical to having a better country which raises the living standards for all, not just the few who've been lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, such as all of us who've been in Silicon Valley for the last 30 years. At NEA, our focus on diversity accelerated significantly in the last 2 years since the tragic murder of George Floyd. The shock and outrage which followed was a tipping point for all of us. We transformed our long-standing diversity committee, bringing it into the heart of our organization and involving more than 24 team members at every different level and function in the company. We invited anyone who wanted to be a part of it. We established 4 pillars to help guide our efforts: education, development and mentorship, talent, and external initiatives and partnerships, with processes and metrics to hold ourselves accountable. 2 years later, our efforts to promote and celebrate diversity have resulted in meaningful change. White males make up less than half of our investing team for the first time in our history. More than 1/3 of our investors are women or underrepresented minorities, and we have 3 times as many Black, Hispanic, or multiracial team members than we did 2 years ago. I know we have a long way to go, but it is heartening and energizing to see how far we've come. As I've heard Andreas say, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Over the years, whether at NEA or in my work with companies and other organizations, I've had the opportunity to observe what works and, frankly, what doesn't work. And so I thought I'd share a few things with you today, and I'd really like you to share what you see working, because from where I stand, even though I'm going to share some ideas with you, I feel like we're still kind of the elephant, you know, the proverbial touching this part of the elephant, and Chris is touching a different part of the elephant, and, you know, we'll have to compare notes, Chris. Anyway. You know, these are things I think you all know. But first, I really do think we have to set ambitious goals. And we're all doing that. But just as important, I think it is to celebrate the small milestones along the way. And why is that important? That's important because that creates momentum. That creates, you know, improves morale. And frankly, it changes the opinion of skeptics. So that's the first one, set ambitious goals. Obviously, if you want to have more diversity in your organization, you have to insist on more diverse candidate pools. In our version of, you know, what's called the Rooney Rule, we insist that the final candidate pool includes the underrepresented minorities that we want to see. What is considered, interestingly, this was a twist we developed about a year ago, what is considered an underrepresented minority is actually different for each position, because we have already achieved certain kinds of diversity that we want in some positions, but not yet in others. And of course, when you get the right people in the process, the rest just takes care of itself. Third, get people involved and welcome different perspectives. True progress is rarely made in silos, but open minds and candid conversations and mutual respect are huge catalysts for change. I have been amazed at what happens when I create an opportunity for change and invite anyone with an interest to step forward and make a difference. The outcome makes you realize that the job people have is not really indicative of what they're capable of. And some people just step up and do stuff and you say, whoa, where did that come from? I actually think that empowering people is easily one of the most gratifying aspects of organizational leadership. And finally, I think we have to infuse best practices at the board level of our companies. I'm speaking to the investors in the room. We have the ability to influence who gets onto our boards. And when you do that, change happens. It starts at the top, but the conversation in the boardroom, I've been on way more boards than I can count. The conversation changes. In venture capital, we tend to see ourselves as problem solvers. An important lesson I learned a while ago is that big problems are seldomly fixed tomorrow or even next year. And I know that patience can feel like complacence when the problem is as urgent as this one, But while change may not happen overnight and it might be frustrating along the way, it can and will happen if we're determined and we stay the course. Even a decade from now, we'll still have work to do, but I am very confident we'll be marveling at what has already been done. Lastly, I am truly humbled to be the first recipient of the Tyson Clark Trailblazer Award. I'll leave here today not only inspired by the work of the Culture Shift Labs and the stories and achievements of my fellow honorees, which are amazing, but with a renewed energy for the work ahead. And in doing that work, I will always think of Tyson, and I will strive to make him proud. Thank you again for this honor.